Good morning. We suggest to start today with the leftovers of the yesterday's session. That means several persons wanted to ask questions, and maybe some other persons would like to ask some questions. So please, I see that gentleman wanted to ask questions yesterday. Okay, please.
El micro de preguntas.
Please, you need a microphone, so just a moment, please. Well, some technical arrangements take time, but we can start already. Could you please give the microphone to...
¿Ustedes antes? Buenos días.
Could you please tell your
nota
name?
de la pregunta y luego se la traduzco.
Estupendo.
¿Vale? Para que no haya...
Mi nombre es Pedro. A raíz de la reflexión sobre el modelo educativo, planteaba la idea de lo que era como un misil dirigido hacia una contraposición de lo que sería una idea del modelo de misil dirigido a un misil inteligente en el proceso del modelo educativo. Entonces, sobre y recuerdo que hizo una cierta reflexión sobre lo que debería ser ese modelo educativo, modelo inteligente, donde en la trayectoria educativa quizás se hiciese avanzar sin un objetivo tan claro y más redefinible en el proceso o en la trayectoria. ¿De acuerdo? Entonces, a mí lo que ahí me sugería, de alguna forma, es hasta qué punto ese misil dirigido, sigo con esta simbología que recuerdo que la apuntó ayer, hasta qué punto ese misil dirigido puede reconvertirse en otra cosa, es decir, puede pasar de misil a paloma, es decir, en qué sentido, de alguna forma, alguien que ha seguido todo un proceso educativo, donde recuerdo que usted también haya... bueno, por no hacerlo tan largo, es hasta qué punto, en ese sentido que me refería cuando se concreta a una persona, oye, pues este es el camino. Perdonaré porque me damos, no sé si... ¿Sí? Sí. Sí, es decir, él hizo ayer toda una simbología. Sí, ok, gracias. Él hizo toda esa simbología, entonces, de alguna forma, hasta qué punto, pues eso, siguiendo esa simbología, hasta qué punto un misil puede convertirse en paloma. Es decir, se hacía como un alegato a intentar decir que las personas, más allá de esa idea tan clara de recorrido vital, pues hiciesen ejercicios de transformación o algo así, intuía. A raíz de esa primera pregunta, cuando habría una segunda idea, que sería en esa reflexión que hizo de la política de la vida, hasta qué punto la política de la vida puede ser una solución o es una escapatoria para la situación actual. No sé, me lo quito, si queréis, ¿eh? Sí. No se lo...
smart and which doesn't have such a clear target. The target should be flexible and you should be able to adapt as you go along. To what extent can a ballistic missile become a pigeon, become a smart missile? Because someone who's followed a clear educational path with a clear target, to what extent can that be changed along the way? And the second idea that we wanted to propose is, to what extent can life politics be the solution to today's situation in the world?
Should I answer now?
Yes.
This is chairperson. Should I answer now or wait for the other question? Right. Okay. A very, very great anthropologist in 20th century, I will write his name here, Gregory Bateson. Who developed a concept of 3 levels of education. The first level is a very simple one. I give you a bit of information, you listen, you imbibe it, so to speak, digest it, and retain it. It is, some people call it rota learning. You just remember the bits of information. That is the most primitive level of education, and the level which actually prevailed until the system of education was invented several millennia years ago, and particularly the, so to speak, watershed, the beginning of the new concept of education was born in ancient Greece with the idea of paideia. I already mentioned paideia yesterday very briefly in passing. Paideia was a concept of education which put emphasis not so much on the passing of information, but on developing skills of assimilating further information which will come later. The paideia was about to give the youngsters who came to academia, to all sorts of pre-modern and pre-medieval schools, ancient schools, in order to acquire. Bateson considered that the normal stages of education, both of them necessary, but both of them functional, so to speak, to the life of society and individuals inside society. And he said that there was a third level of education, which he considered to be pathological, sort of an illness, which destroys the monotonous, regular reproduction of conditions of human life in society. This third level consisted not in assimilating knowledge to the already existing backbone or the already existing frame, but on the contrary, the ability to break the frames and invent different frame for the time being to replace it. But once you started this business of breaking the frameworks, then there was no end to it, and in a sense, this breaking of frames acquired a self-reinforcing, self-propelling momentum. And therefore the vision of the world became permanently frail, brittle, unreliable, and temporary. I repeat, Gregory Bateson considered it a pathology, a deviation from a norm, a disorder. However, today, with the passage from ballistic missile to smart missile, what used to be the deviation from the norm has turned into the norm itself. Whatever information you get in the process of education, and by education I don't mean just what is happening in the schoolroom, but I mean everything which exerts pressure on your senses. Everything you read walking along the street and reading the commercials, the big posters on the street, switching on television, looking for a play, but play is interrupted after 2 or 3 minutes, and again commercials are coming. The celebrities which appear on the first pages of glossy magazines and very often on first pages of serious papers as well, and inform you about the rate of divorce in the higher circles over there, and what sort of fashion they wear and so on. All that affecting your image of the world is an element of education. Only a very small part of it. Only a small part of it is regular, planned, formal, subjected to a curriculum, previously designed, and things like that. We are now in such a situation. We are living in an unstable world. Each time you open TV set, or each time you enter internet, like so many of you are doing now at the moment, and each time you join the Facebook to see what your 500 or 1,000 friends, Facebook friends communicated, all that is element of information. It has been, how to put it, like so many other aspects of our society, deregulated. There are no firm rules there. It's a constant change of not only of information, but also of the frame, the cognitive frame in which you locate and systematize and bring into order the bits and pieces of information which come from there. So it's a completely new context, social cultural context of learning, and obviously also of teaching. The problem consists in the fact that, well, when I was a student, like many of you are at the moment, I was told that the difference between culture and nature consists in the fact that culture is about learning, I have the impression that one could easily say that contemporary culture is not so much about learning, but about forgetting, about what is decisive for being online, for being able to orientate yourself in the world around you, is how soon you can forget what you learned yesterday and replace it with completely different worldview and a different frame of cognition. So the emphasis shifted into the opposite part of the other side of the opposition. Learning was the fight against forgetting, but now the emphasis is on forgetting, which enables you to free yourself from the burden of the assimilated already and settled ideas, which are out of fashion and out of their time, they're outdated, and readiness to replace them overnight, immediately, right away, with a completely different worldview. Now, because education, in whatever level, first, second, and third, has the same purpose. The purpose is to prepare people learning for life, preparing for life. And because life, which we are going to spend, is in all likelihood life precisely of forgetting, of replacing, or increasing speed with which one bit of knowledge considered to be authoritative today becomes outdated, should be rejected, shouldn't be used again because it is clearly ineffective and may lead you into mistakes, sometimes very grave mistakes. Now, if that is the kind of life which we enter, then presumably the third level of Gregory Bates on education is precisely the right kind. In practice, some of you are teachers, some of you are interested how to find your own place in this sort of a context. Well, what in practice follows is that the one-off education in which you can acquire skills for the rest of your life is not on the cards. It's not very unlikely to achieve its purpose of making its disciples, its objects of education, prepared for living under conditions which are there in reality. The only form of education, I think, which fits the new situation is what is called lifelong education. Education constantly refreshed, constantly restructured, helping you to orientate yourself in the cognitive frameworks which have already been broken, so that you can also follow the direction of change and acquire the new knowledge necessary there. Well, that's the only thing I can offer you. I am not an expert in educational science, so how to translate these general things into practical recommendations, how to proceed, is a matter for you to achieve, to find out and decide. The second question was about life politics. Well, I told you yesterday that we are all already individuals by decree of fate. Not necessarily by decree of some prime minister who signed it. You are individuals. I wonder whether you remember Life of Brian, film of Monty Python. Have you seen it or not? That's a wonderful scene when the alleged prophet is followed by a crowd of followers, and he is furious because he brought a different tidings, different news to them. He wanted to tell them that they are all individuals standing on their own feet. But no, they go and repeat every word in chorus, whatever he said. And he said, stop following me, stop repeating after me, you are individuals. And they repeat, we are individuals, we are individuals, until you hear one voice who said, I am not. Now, that's the problem for contemporary individuality. Individuals by decree, that means that we are held responsible for whatever we do. We are assumed to be the makers of our own life, and this assumption is inadvertently or surreptitiously, clandestinely transformed into a statement of fact. What has been assumed is recognized, is taken for the statement of fact. We really are makers of our own life. So we are individuals de jure, by law, by the letter of law. Now the big question which follows it immediately, once you said that, is that in order to fulfill the law, to obey the law, we should make ourselves individuals de facto. And there is a distance between the two. it is relatively easy to be decreed individual de jure, but it is hell of a job, really, to pass from there to individual de facto, because to become individual de facto, you need to have quite a lot of capabilities, skills, which not everybody possesses. You need to be prepared to engage in a very hard work, which never ends, because the question of identity, of acquiring identity, has been also transformed in the liquid modern setting from a one-off task. I create my identity, which I wanted, and then I stick to it. I defend it tooth and nail for the rest of my life. Now, from that sort of identity transformed into another problem, into the problem of the flexibility, the ability to modify, to change, or completely replace your old identity and acquire a new one. And as you probably know, if you have little children, they already, at the age of 8, 9, 10 years, the primary school age, having joined Facebook, are rehearsing day by day the art of having multiple identities at the same time and changing identity at will. So identity became the lifelong process. In contemporary edition of identity, we are required to be somebody's, and at the same time to be able to become somebody else. Contradictory demands, which are both present in the challenge of identification, and both should be obeyed, but they are at odds with each other. So a lot of skill is required to become individual de facto. The third thing which is required is, I repeat here, the ability to very, very hard work and lifelong work. And the fourth thing which is required, resources. Not everybody in society, because of his or her social position, has the same range of options from which to choose. Some people have very wide, some people have very narrow. If you are at the bottom of social ladder, obviously your range of choices is much more humble than in case you were somewhere in the upper regions of the same hierarchy. It all depends, it terribly much depends on in which area of the country you were born, in which area of the city you were born. These are elements on which you have very little or no influence at all. In the little book about art of life, I suggested that there are two independent factors which really conjointly decide about the trajectory of individual life. One is called fate. Fate means all the factors on which we have no influence, things which happen to us but are not of our own making. That is the fate. That's the shorthand name for these uncontrolled factors in our life are called fate. Is fate. And the second is character. So the fate determines the range of options which is realistically open to you. But the character makes the choices between these options. Well, it's very important which choices you are making, but remember that the range of options which are open for choosing is predetermined already by what you call fate. Place of your birth, the kind of family from which you come, some unexpected circumstances which broke the continuity of your life itinerary, and so on. Which means that the assumption or that life politics can actually determine your degree of happiness or unhappiness, your success and your defeat, single-handedly, so to speak, that it is a deception. It's a deception. That's really not on. Life politics cannot deal with all these tremendously important elements which are socially produced but not under individual control. To say that you are in full control of your life is a lie. I'm terribly sorry, Professor Kania, because you rightly thought in your writings about the importance of this feeling of control over life, but I don't believe that well, feeling you may have, but the reality of full control over life is much beyond our reach. Therefore, creation of the sphere of life politics, the meaning of it, social meaning of it, I suggest to you, is mostly the fact of abandoning by the supra-individual institutions, like the state or the community, abandoning of the functions which previously the collectivity took upon itself. Many functions in life, like creating wider range of chances, for example. That was the responsibility of community to which you belong, to the nation, to the state which acted in the name of the nation. Abandoning of all that to putting it, throwing it, casting it on the shoulders of individual person, which are too weak to carry them. It's just shedding of responsibility rather than giving the new ability, the new possibilities and new power.
Okay, are there further questions? Well, if not, then maybe we will proceed with the plan of the lectures, and now Professor Bauman will talk about the fate of social inequality in liquid modern times.
Well, to start with, there's very little new about inequality. I don't bring you any new information here. Inequality was accompanying human life from times memorial. In every society there were people who were at the top and at the bottom. All societies, all human societies, as far as I know, the societies which are experienced personally, societies about which I read in historical and anthropological studies, had one thing in common, that people were unequal practically inside them. But what does it mean? What was the mechanism which created inequality between people? Changed from one society to another. To take people living in poverty, people who were deprived one way or the other, not only in the sense of material level of living, of the amount of things which they could consume daily, the absence of hunger and things like that, but also from the point of view of the meaning which was ascribed to them by society. And the interesting point is that the poor people had in every society been acquired certain function. They had function. take the pre-modern times. In pre-modern times, the poor people were beggars sitting on the staircases of churches, and they were the godsend gifts to the people who were better off, because they gave the occasion to do good things, and therefore to earn your life, posthumous life, in paradise. You could, they were the only occasion in which all were given to you to document that you are a meritorious person and therefore deserving reward after your death. And because pre-modern times were orientated towards really the eternity rather than the current situation, and people were oriented to the salvation of the soul and deserving the posthumous life in paradise, eternal happiness, was crucial. Remember that time you spend on earth, the bodily, the fleshy life, not the life of spirit, not the life of soul, but your bodily life, was the only time where you could determine the future, the eternal future of the soul. There was no second chance. After you were dead, everything was finished. The soul itself could not earn merits to be transferred to paradise, unless you have done it before you died. And therefore, you needed really the resources to earn this eternal happiness, and the poor people, your charity, your assistance you gave them, was tremendously important task of life. That saved people living in poverty from disaster, assignment of this kind of a function. Then came the modern times, and one can say briefly about it is that another function has been assigned to people living in poverty. This time not caused, not inspired by the care about eternal life after death, but inspired by the sentiments, worries and ambitions connected to the early modern process of nation building. Transferring from the local community of neighbors, from the locality to the imagined community of state, of nation and state. The building of nation, building of state. How to build it? Well, to make it immune to adversities of fate, to make it reliable, to make it lasting, solid, and so on. How to do it? The idea dominating in Europe, starting from early 19th century and throughout 19th and 20th century, that it all depends on the number of people able to stand up to the challenges of the factory floor or of the battlefield. Workers and soldiers, that's what made the nation powerful and safe. You needed more labor force, you needed more able-bodied future soldiers which could be called to the active service in case of necessity. Two things. In 1902 there was the Boer War, you probably know it from history, conducted by the British Empire, and suddenly the very wide mobilization of soldiers to the British Army was needed. The panic ensued, the national panic, because the recruiting commissions rejected 50% of the candidates to the active service. On what ground? On the ground of being undernourished, underdeveloped, weak, physically weak, and ignorant, illiterate, otherwise incapable of effective military service. And having half of population rejected from the army service meant the shaking of the very foundation of the idea of the national power, national influence, national superiority, and so on. So there was panic, and a turn, very rapid turn of public opinion in favor of recasting, renaming, reshaping the people living in poverty as the reserve army of labor. Reserve army, military army, and reserve army of labor. And as every general would tell you, if you have people who are reservists, waiting, ready to be called back into active service, you have to take care of them. Because when it comes to the time of the battle, they need to be fully prepared to do it. And what does it mean? That means that they need decent food, they need decent shelter, they need sanitary conditions, medical care, schooling, regular schooling. They should be literate, they should be able to learn the rules of the warfare, and so on, so on. That was the function attached to people who were, for one reason or another, mostly now defined as unemployed, were treated. Unemployment is a very interesting concept. There is a prefix un added to the word employed, which suggests right away, immediately, that the normality is to be employed. Unemployed is something exceptional, abnormal, and something which should be repaired, should be dealt with, should be removed, and the direction of collective action is determined by the need to restore society to its norm, to full employment. The more people are working in the factory, the richer the country is, and the more people are able-bodied and educated and well-fed, the stronger is the army, and both taken into account, the country may become, as so many countries in Europe became really at that time, the centers of empires which were worldwide. The adding to the nation's strength meant conquering more territories together with the population which inhabited it, and transforming both the resources of the conquered country and the people who live there, just recruiting them into the service of the imperial center. It is the first time in our time, again, when inequality acquires different shape. Namely, what I mean is that for the first time probably in history, people living in poverty have no function. That they no longer help us to pave the way to the paradise, and they no longer are considered as reserve army of labor. Why not? Not reserve army of labor because the industrial workers today, as you probably know, undergo the same process which agricultural workers underwent in the 19th century. They started at the beginning of the 19th century being 90% of the population. They ended the 19th century with being 9% of the population. Otherwise, they were transferred to other areas of life. Now, if Marx and Engels, together with the opinion of their time, predicted that in the future all of us will be workers in some sort of factories. It didn't happen. On the contrary, now already the percentage of people employed in industry is falling down very, very quickly. It is reaching already the same level as agricultural labor reached by the end of the 19th century, namely this fabulous 9% of the population. So you don't need reserve army of labor. You don't need it any longer. As far as the military reserve army, well, mind you, you know that the universal obligation to serve your country is already abolished. The contemporary army, contemporary warfare does not need many soldiers. It needs relatively few numbers, but highly educated, highly specialized, technologically literate professional army. The army became just one of the many professions. You volunteer, you just send an application to be accepted. If you are okay, you are accepted. If not, you are rejected. And that's just a mutual contract. Job like any other. Perhaps a little bit more risky, but anyway, treated in the same way through the glasses of trade union experience. So masses to be called to the army when needed are also unnecessary. And mind you, have you noticed the word unemployed is more and more seldom used today. People are not made unemployed any longer. People are made, that is the new language used, redundant. Redundant. And that's a big change, very, very fundamental change expressed by this change of wording, or the change of language. Because unemployed is people in abnormal, is a man in abnormal situation which needs to be restored to normality. Redundant, however, is just out of job, out of need, not unnecessary, supernumerary, not good for anything else. The tacit assumption behind this cruel word redundant, I am redundant, is that no one needs me, and the rest of people would be better off if I disappeared, because no one needs me for anything. Not for salvation of soul, not for the strength of the nation. On the contrary, I am a burden on the shoulders of the normal people who are, how they are defined today. Normal persons, members of society, are defined as taxpayers. Taxpayers are I am burden on their shoulders, which means that ordinary people would be better off if redundant people disappeared, packed up their belongings and went somewhere to an uninhabited island, for example. So it's a new phenomenon, and that cannot but have impact on the shape of inequality. So allow me to return to the issue of inequality as it looks at the moment. Two authors, Kate Pickett and Richard Wilkinson Richard Wilkinson, Kate Pickett and Richard eye-opening book called The Spirit of Equality, a book based on very thorough comparative research of many countries, comparing the degree of inequality inside the society and trying to work out the statistical correlation between this level of inequality and all sorts of societal illnesses, societal abnormalities, like a degree of alcoholism, the frequency of depression, of teenager pregnancy, of all sorts of juvenile criminality, and other worries which we normally, drug use and so on, and other worries which we normally think about when we are caring about the well-being of society in which we live. What they found, to their original amazement, but now it is becoming very quickly part of the doxa of common opinion shared in social sciences, the degree of social health, so to speak, the absence of this abnormal phenomenon, correlates not with the average income of the members of the population, not with the general level of prosperity in society, but with the division of wealth. However high is GNP, namely gross national product, by which we are used to measure the degree of well-being in society, however high is the average income by person in this society, it does not correlate meaningfully with the all sorts of abnormalities and afflictions of a given society. The degree of inequality does correlate. So if you want to get rid of social problems, of social pathologies, you have to put your attention to the ways of lessening the degree of inequality in a society. Well, that's one finding. Glenn Firebaugh finding is another eye-opener. It showed that if until quite recently, 10 or 15 years ago, we were thinking that inequalities between different regions of the planet, what we call developed countries and underdeveloped countries, or developing countries, as we deceitfully called the undeveloped countries. Anyway, this inequality between them grows. That was the opinion, that the distance of income does not shrink, on the contrary, it goes bigger and bigger. But, on the other hand, that was the other belief which we held, we stopped, arrested, or even reversed the growth of inequality inside society, particularly developed society, thanks to the work of welfare state, all this social care about people and provision of national health service, provision of national subsidies for accommodation, development of education, easily available, and so on. Inside the societies, inequality shrunk. Now, what Firebaugh found is that it was really the case until, say, 20, 30 years ago, but it's no longer the case. It's no longer the case thanks to the series of birth of new economic tigers, new economic miracles like China, Brazil, South Africa, India, partly Russia now, and other places like that. The distance between developed and undeveloped countries is going smaller, is getting smaller, but the degree of inequality inside single developed societies is going sky high and nearing the 19th century level. It's very difficult to assess the degree of influence of the brief period in our history, period when welfare state was introduced and established and entrenched in our daily life. How large was the influence of this episode in our history on the changing shape of inequality? I will give you just a few examples. In the year 1913, in France, 1% of the population had 53% of the national wealth. 1%. In 1984, this 53% fell to the level of 20%. That was the impact of slowly but ever more widely introduced services of the État-providence, as the Frenchmen call it. In the United States of America, 10 richest members of the society in 1924 were in possession of 50% of national wealth. By 1950, after New Deal of Roosevelt, it fell to 32%, almost halved. In Sweden, just to give you an example from a different kind of society, in 1910, 1% of the population, which was still semi-feudal, highly aristocratic society, 1% had 46% of the whole national wealth. By 1980, it held only 23%. So the trend was quite clear. From very, very wide inequality, very drastic inequality in European societies, we went towards diminishing it by introducing progressive taxes and very elaborate network of the social institutions. If you put together these discrepancies between the standard of living of developed and underdeveloped countries and the inequality inside the developed countries themselves, you will find today's situation in which 5%, top 5% of the Earth's population holds 73% of the planetary wealth. 5% holds 73% of planetary wealth, and 5% at the bottom holds only 2% of the planetary wealth. That's roughly the frame of the contemporary inequality. Now the big question which I would like to ask you after a 10 minutes break for a smoke is how come that it happened? What are the mechanisms behind it? All right? Oh, good. 10 minutes? 15. 15? All right, 15 minutes.
We should continue now because at 11:30 we are obliged to make a break for a short press conference. So Professor Bauman will continue his speech. Okay, I think they will come.
All right, I'll go on then. 15 minutes past, so I can do it with clear conscience. The answer which I promised you before the interruption was to explain the question why these ups and downs in history of inequality in modern times. I suggest to you, that is the general suggestion, that it is very closely connected with the passage from solid modernity to liquid modernity, and this process of deregulation associated with this passage. The interesting point about the emergence and establishment of welfare state, few people remember now that it was not a left-wing idea, not left-wing invention, that was not a deal made by socialist or social democratic parties or communists or whatever. It was virtually the liberal invention. Liberalism which, for whom the major idea was to give equal chances to human individual, to reduce the role of the state to creating conditions for individual self-assertion. Now, this idea could be completed only in the way of giving those who did not have resources, did not have the conditions to self-assert, give them these conditions by raising their level of education, by raising their amount of leisure time in which to improve themselves, learn things, acquire more skills, and so on. The people who introduced first founding acts of welfare state were in Germany Bismarck, who was everything but socialist, and in England Lloyd George, who again was a full-time liberal rather than any kind of socialist. But the problem was that because of people living out of production and below the level of poverty, were reserve army of labor and reserve army in the first sense of army, the military sense. Because of that, the introduction of a welfare state was beyond left and right. It was not a partisan issue. Everybody, every patriot agreed that it's a good investment. If you love your country, if you want your country strong, then you have to agree into welfare state. Otherwise, your country will be weak and easy to be defeated, invaded, conquered, and certainly it won't win the tooth and nail competition between different nations. Beyond left and right, what has happened that today, I am afraid to say so, what is beyond left and right is dismantling of welfare state. Exactly the opposite. As exemplified by Anthony Giddens, a very great mind, very good sociologist, in his famous, or rather infamous book, Third Way, which means left wing accepting the right wing ideas. That was roughly the meaning of the book he produced. Because more and more people who are out of work and unnecessary, without function, without possible contribution to the wealth of the nation, are simply considered not worthy of attention, only being burden on the shoulders of the taxpayer, diminishing the well-being of the state by putting a burden on the state budget and on the incomes of ordinary people, holders of credit cards, holders of bank accounts, people with easy access to bank credit in general. Now, where from comes this change? I would start from Henry Ford. Henry Ford, who was the guru of worldwide businessmen in 1920s and 1930s, at the high time of the solid modernity, the last period in history of solid modernity. Now, what Henry Ford did, he surprised the whole American public opinion by doubling the wages of his workers. Everybody was amazed, astonished, puzzled, and even frightened, because it went against the grain of the wisdom. The wisdom of the time was to cut down on expenditure, and wages was a very high, very big part of the expenditures in order to increase profits. Ford, however, in spite of this trend, did exactly the opposite and doubled the wages of his workers. When inquired by journalists asking him, Mr. Ford, what have you done? Why are you doing such crazy things? He answered, because I want my workers to buy my cars. Of course, it was a joke. Henry Ford was not only a very clever, very intelligent man, but also a very witty man, and he made a joke. Because how many cars his workers could buy to make the change in his profits? Of course, very few of them. On the other hand, doubling their wages increased very, very considerably the cost of producing cars. What he did was caused by completely different consideration. Henry Ford, unlike contemporary businessmen who have laptops or iPads and could, with one pressing of the finger, transfer their wealth-producing enterprises to some very distant country, if they don't like the local trade unions, if they don't like the local legislation which constrains their freedom and cuts on their profits. Unlike them, all his wealth was invested in a bulky, heavy technology, in huge factory halls, in the walls surrounding them, and to put it in the nutshell, invested in the local labor force. If he couldn't transfer his factories, he couldn't also get rid of meeting the local labor force. What was typical for the industrial society or for the solid modern period in history of modernity was that the dependency between capital and labor was reciprocal, mutual. The workers of Ford were dependent on Ford for their living. There's no question about that. But Ford himself was dependent on Detroit or Chicago workers for his wealth. Both sides knew damn well that they will meet again tomorrow and the day after tomorrow and the week after this week and the year after this year, as Daniel Cohen, great economist working in Sorbonne in Paris, put it, when an 18-year-old went to apprenticeship in a factory of Renault, he could be pretty sure that after 40 years of faithful service, he will retire there with a gold watch, as memory of his good services. While today, in Silicon Valley is the Mecca of all young, ambitious people. They dream about going there. It is the highest point they can arrive. Now, in this Silicon Valley, the average length of employment is, you don't know how much? 8 months. Average length of employment, 8 months. As compared this apprentice earning little money but having security for the next 40 years with those young people who earn one day several thousands, if not several dozens of thousands, but cannot be sure what will happen to them in 8 months' time. So that is the difference of the situation. Mobility, this unilateral break of mutuality. Unilateral break of mutuality. The ex-workers of Ford are still dependent on Ford. They lose their livelihood if he goes away. But Ford, or rather successors of Ford, contemporary businessmen, can move away and leave their workers behind without losing their wealth. On the contrary, in order to increase their wealth. Therefore, the mutuality of dependency between local businessmen and local working force has been broken. That's an entirely new kind of a game. Local businessmen of the past being aware that they are condemned to work with the same labor force over and over again, year by year, and 10 of years after 10 of years, had to sit down to the table that was called collective bargaining, if you remember the term, sat around the table with representatives of their workers and agree some mutually acceptable modus vivendi. Go for some sort of a compromise. Set limits to possible inequality so that they won't destroy the source of their own wealth. The source of their own wealth was local labor force. If they lost them, they will lose sources of their wealth. That's no longer the question. We have new global elite now, global elite of finances, of industry, of trade, of banking, which is freely moving around the world, not tied to the place. It is the luxury, the privilege this elite has, but of which their labor force is deprived. They are not free to move. If they do start moving, they will be stopped at the nearest border and rounded up, and if possible sent back where they came from. So their freedom of movement is nowhere near the freedom of movement of now deregulated financial and industrial elite. That's a complete change of the rules of the game, and there is no reason, no rational reason, why there should one put a limit on the inequality of income between the bosses and their subordinates. What for? These subordinates are not necessary for the bosses. They can find subordinates anywhere in the world, wherever people are ready to work for $2 a day, they can transfer their business and build their factories out there, leaving behind the unionized working force, which is very, very stubborn in its demands, which used to go to strike and deprive bosses of their income and so on. It is not just the question of breaking the limits to expanding inequality. It is also the question of changing the nature of the domination. Domination which is behind the phenomenon of inequality. You have inequality because some people have the right to decide the fate of some other people, one category over the other, and therefore you must have a sort of an elite, superiors, in order to which set the rules of the game and set the tune, as in the English proverb, who pays the piper sets the tune, in order to have inequality. Now, domination is a general concept. It is the right to set the rules of the game. But how it works in practice is changeable. It's changeable. Sorry, I have to add some. No, you have. You have it. Jeremy Bentham. Jeremy Bentham, at the bottom, this name. It was the philosopher and legal specialist, lawyer, and politician living between 18th and 19th century, who came forward with this formula for all people who have to dominate other people's behavior, who have to manage other people's behavior. Doesn't matter in which kind of social sector they worked. It applies in equal measure to the factory, as to the prison, as to the military barracks, as to the hospitals, as to the workhouses, as to the, mind you, classrooms also. Always what is common to all these very different outfits is that in all cases some people must control behavior of other people. And Jeremy Bentham came with the idea of universal solution to the question of control. He called this solution panopticon. Panopticon, in loose translation into English, means see it all, see it all, see it all. He said that whether you are building a military barracks, or whether you are building a school, or whether you are building a prison, or whether you are building a factory, the architectural design should be always the same. What design? Central tower with windows around and wings going in different directions starting from this central round tower. Inside the central tower, the surveyors will be placed who watch, who see whatever is going on in the wings. People in the wings, however, don't see what's going on inside the tower. That's very important. So, the idea of Jeremy Bentham in its nutshell was that surveillance should be asymmetrical. It divides people into those who watch, and those who are watched. And that's the solution to the issue of control. Because people who are in these wings cannot make sure whether they are at the moment observed, under observation, or whether their surveyors have a cup of tea or went to sleep, or have a drinking bout or whatever. They can never be sure that they are not under surveillance. And because they are never sure, they have to be disciplined 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all the time, every time. If you remember George Orwell 1984, I hope you read it. If you haven't read it, you must read it now. there was a two-directional television screen which was obligatory in every private room in the country described by George Orwell. And Winston Smith, the hero of the novel, Once Upon a Time, is much to his horror, learns that it is someone looking at him from the television screen, someone whom he cannot see, because when he didn't follow the routine 10 minutes of gymnastics in the morning, he was rebuked from the screen. Mr. Smith, you are not following the exercise. So that's roughly the idea of asymmetricality of surveillance. Michel Foucault, I don't like the name because I hope that you know the name, you don't need it, in writing. Michel Foucault made out of the panopticon of Jeremy Bentham a general theory of the nature of dominance in a modern society. It is based on surveillance. And I repeat, under asymmetrical surveillance. That's very important. And now I'd like to suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, that the times of panopticon are over now. Why are they over? James Bentham, a name above Jeremy Bentham, he produced, by the end of 1930s, a little book, Managerial Revolution, which was, in its intention, polemics against Karl Marx theory, at that time very influential and almost dominant in thinking about the nature of contemporary power. What Karl Marx suggested was that the owners of the means of production are the rulers. Whoever has means of production rules over society. Power is identical with possession of means of production. Reasoning of Marx was very simple. It simply amounted to the fact that in contemporary industry, when means of work, tools of work are very complicated and expensive, unless you are in possession of them, you are unable to produce things which can assure you of living. So you go to the people who own them and have to sell your labor force in exchange for the access to this means of production. And therefore they secure their own domination over your future. They bought your 8 hours a day or 9 hours a day, and during that time, in order to get your living, you have to work with somebody else's means of production. Well, the novelty introduced by James Bentham was that, contrary to Marx's expectation, the practicing of this domination was very cumbersome, very inconvenient, very heavy work, demanding constant presence, involving you in a lot of conflict, in fighting the resistance, open resistance or tacit resistance of your subordinates. And whoever was rich, whoever got profit out of possession of means of production, first thing they will do is to hire people to do the dirty work for them. These people whom they hired were called managers. They were allegedly, ostensibly, their servants, he said. But in fact, it was not like that. because it was soon proved that the hierarchy of power between the owners and the managers has been turned upside down. The real power is in the ability to manage conduct of other people. That's the secret. Secret which Marx did not came through too. At the beginning, managers were hired, but soon their acquired power, they used to reduce the owners to stockholders. Stockholders, as you know, have no influence whatsoever how the wealth-producing factories are working. That's the business of managers. That's what they are doing. The only thing they know, the stockholders, is that managers pay them bonuses for their ownership once a year or twice a year, depending on the contract they sign. But that's all. They don't have real power. They are using only the fruits of the power action of their hired managers. All right. That is what, according to James Benham, Marx did not anticipate. But what James Benham did not anticipate, we may ask. Well, he didn't follow his own logic. What he didn't anticipate is that once managers took over power, the first thing they will do is to get rid of this cumbersome, unpleasant, very costly and very inconvenient job of supervising. What for? They should bear responsibility for the effects of work of their subordinates. It's much more convenient and much less costly to shift responsibility to them. Let them organize their own work. Let them come to us with the results. Let them prove that they are worth being kept in employment, that they are useful and increasing the income of the institution for which they work. And this is exactly what's happening. I suggest to you that if James Benham survived to our times, he would probably publish a second volume to his book called Managerial Revolution, and the title of the second volume would be Managerial Revolution Mark II. And Managerial Revolution Mark II, in the nutshell, boils down to the question of managers getting rid of managing and shifting the task of managing, which is very difficult, to the self-management of their subordinates. You probably know, I don't know whether you have already equivalents in Spanish language, but new words appeared now in the common parlor without actual reference to this revolution, second managerial revolution, which is behind it. Terms like contracting out, formally transforming a part of the bureaucratic organization, transforming it into a relatively, allegedly, ostensibly separate business, and contracting also with this business about, on the basis of the services rendered. Or the term like hiving off, cutting out parts of the business and making mini businesses out of them, again supplying the services in the form of commodities for which they are paid on implementation. Or the term outsourcing. instead of producing parts of the totality inside, at home, just buying them from other little businesses. Then there is the concept of subsidiarizing. They are all concepts which reflect new managerial philosophy. Everybody, that is very close to your question at the beginning about life politics, because, the management becomes a part and parcel of life politics of human individual. You have to self-manage, and if you are good in self-managing, then you can sell yourself as a commodity, not as a labor force, but as a commodity to somebody willing to buy your products. And that's the difference. That's the difference, ladies and gentlemen. In case of Henry Ford, Henry Ford invented conveyor belt in which the job of surveillance, the job of panopticon, was made tremendously easy because, as you remember, the Charlie Chaplin film, Modern Times, virtually every worker was tied down to a particular place in the conveyor belt, and his movements, whatever he did in 7 or 8 hours of employment, were determined fully, without any choice on his side, by the pace of movement of the conveyor belt. The same intention inspired the contribution of Frederick Taylor, his name is written there, when he introduced time and motion measurement technique. So you can actually measure exactly the time it takes to move your left wing to the right side or the right hand to the left side, and to turn it clockwise or anti-clockwise, to pin the screw where it should be, measure it exactly, and organize the working bench of the worker in such a way that his movements become almost automatic or even fully automatic. No time for thinking, no time for reflection, no time of making decisions. Everything is designed in advance. That's the problem. The job of surveillance is, of course, demanding, and of course it is conflict-ridden. That's all true, but at the same time, technically, quite easy to achieve. That was the function of panopticon. After second managerial revolution, panopticon is out of use. The managers are free now. They can enjoy their superior position, finally, instead of being, they are not tied to the place and place any longer, while their subordinates really are to do it, as the English say, DIY. DIY means do it yourself. It's managing, supervision is do it yourself business. It doesn't mean that panopticon disappeared completely. Panopticon is still very much in operation. Panoptical system of domination. It is applied to people who have been removed outside the realm of society, incarcerated, the prisoners. Prisons, concentration camps, the asylum seekers camps, and so on. They are still using panoptical techniques of supervision. But from the rest of society, they have been removed. People are expected to follow the rules through different mechanisms than this very heavy, very cumbersome, very inconvenient, uncomfortable mechanism of direct asymmetrical supervision. There are two kinds of power, ladies and gentlemen. Joseph Nye, professor of Harvard, did I write the name? Nye. Joseph Nye, professor of Harvard and previous consultant of very high levels of politics, American politics in particular, man with very great influence on American thinking and American politics, suggests that there are two kinds of power. One is the hard power, the other is soft power. Hard power, soft power. What does it mean? Roughly is the following. Hard power is forcing you, coercing you to follow my command. Soft power, however, is to entice you, to tempt you, to seduce you to follow my wish. Very different kind of thing. Now, if you are a master in applying soft power, then you achieve amazing result that people are exactly doing what you want, but they think that they do it on their own will. That they do it because they like it, because that's something exactly what they would like to be done. Hard power was used in panoptical system of domination, in the solid modernity, universally. It has been still until quite recently used by the country which thought erroneously that it may become the world empire regulating the life of the planet as a whole. I have in mind United States of America after the fall of Berlin Wall. There was a brief period when they really thought that they can rule the world, or at least police the world, using the hard power. Well, Joseph Nye points out that what's happened is that following this wrong assumption, United States went to Iraq and Afghanistan. They succeeded in terms of hard power marvelously because they killed 100,000 Iraqis. Great achievement, judging the strength of Saddam Hussein army, one of the strongest armies in the world. They destroyed it in a matter of a week or two. But in terms of a soft power, they lost millions of their enthusiastic supporters in the Middle East. So exchange was clearly not to the benefit of the United States. It does not pay today. That is what Joseph Nye tries to persuade, to convince American politicians about. It doesn't pay now to resort to hard power. What you do need to achieve is to use skillfully the soft power, power of persuasion, power of temptation, power of seduction, Now show some glittering purposes to people, they will like it, and then they will do anything for you in order to get it. It is a new kind of idea of domination which is taken over from the commodity market, from the consumerist society in which we are. At the very beginning of consumerism, domination of our lives, Pierre Bourdieu, you know the name or not? Pierre Bourdieu, the great French sociologist, pointed out that from the normative regulation, we go over precisely to seduction. And that's the policy of commodity market. commodity market addressed to consumers. You are not coerced to buy what they offer. You are doing it on your own will. But the task of specialists of marketing is to make you to desire, to want to buy it, to make you to wish to throw away your perfectly good mobile telephone only because what is on offer, what you saw and what you desire is another mobile telephone with one gadget extra which your old mobile telephone doesn't have. And the same applies to changing your television set, to changing your music library, to changing your iPad, to changing your computer, laptop, or whatever. Everything which is novelty, calculated to increase profits simply by being a novelty. It's continuous process of seduction, cult of novelty, which is power, which is the major power, according to Pierre Bourdieu, which is already taking over, already having taken over hard power in the task of regulating the reproduction of society. It is more efficient and less costly than the old power which was replaced by it. But if we recede, if we retract, if we retreat from application of hard power, then what for do we need panopticon? Hard power is needed where the seduction and temptation doesn't work. People put into prison, why? Because they are hopeless cases. Because there is very little hope that they will abide by the rules simply suggested by the commercials. They are unlikely to surrender, to be tempted, partly because they are ill-formed, but partly because they don't have the money, they don't have the means. They can't be seduced because they don't have credit cards like most of you do. They don't have the bank accounts, and they don't have any savings. No one will give them anything on credit, so they can't be tempted. And they go to prison. Mind you, sorry? No. Have you heard another new concept, underclass? Underclass. What does it mean, underclass? It is different from the old ideas of lower class. Because lower class is a class, the idea, what is it's awaiting in your imagination is a vision of a ladder. They are at the bottom of the ladder, but there is a ladder which they would be able to climb. They are still inside the system. They are instead inside the class system. However, underclass means being not member of any class, however low it may be. You are cast outside the class system. Class system lives by principles, by methods which those people are immune to. And hence, attached process of the invention to the invention of the underclass, namely criminalization of the social problems. If people who previously constituted a social problem, namely a category of population which needed some help in climbing up from their poverty, they are now criminalized and sent to the prison, away from trouble. And that is the only way where panopticon is still very much alive, in the only place where panopticon is still alive. Why? Because those people would not accept the soft power. They have to be subjected to the hard power. And what otherwise will happen to them, I will tell you when we come back after the break. Have a press conference at 11:30, so I have to talk to somebody else now. Tell me.